The fashion-obsessed teacher's cruel words echoed through the classroom as Emma sat frozen in humiliation. "Those old boots and that patched-up dress don't belong in my honors class." But the next morning, when a pristine Gulfstream G650 touched down on the school's football field, Ms. Peterson's smug expression shattered as the distinguished silver-haired man who emerged introduced himself. "I'm Emma's grandfather, and I believe we need to discuss your treatment of my granddaughter." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mountainview High School stood as a monument to small-town success in Henderson County. Its red brick buildings and sprawling sports fields represented the community's pride, funded largely by prosperous families who had transformed the once rural area into an affluent suburb. The original farming families who had populated the region for generations now found themselves increasingly marginalized. Ms. Victoria Peterson's advanced fashion design course was considered the crown jewel of the school's elective program. At 42, with a master's degree from Parsons and 5 years at a fashion magazine in New York, she had returned to her hometown determined to bring sophisticated aesthetic sensibilities to what she considered her culturally deprived origins. Her classroom reflected this philosophy. Sleek white desks, walls adorned with framed fashion magazine covers, and a display case showcasing designs from her often-mentioned stint working adjacent to famous designers. A sign above her desk proclaimed, "Presentation is everything." Ms. Peterson's platinum blonde bob remained perfectly styled as she paced the classroom on a crisp October morning, her Italian leather heels clicking on the polished floor. She wore a navy designer suit she had mentioned was last season's Burberry. "Multiple times already. Today," she announced, "we begin our unit on personal brand development. In the fashion industry, you are your brand. How you present yourself speaks volumes before you ever open your mouth." The students, mostly from affluent families, sat attentively. Many had selected this course because Miss Peterson was known to favor students with obvious indicators of wealth. Her recommendations to prestigious design colleges carried significant weight. The classroom door opened, and Principal Warner ushered in a new student. "Ms. Peterson, this is Emma Hayes. She's joining your class today. Her transfer was just approved based on her exceptional portfolio." Emma stood awkwardly in the doorway, clutching a well-worn leather portfolio. At 16, she had bright hazel eyes and chestnut hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. But Ms. Peterson's gaze instantly registered only the girl's clothing. Sturdy, boots that had clearly seen years of use, a simple blue dress with a visible patch on one sleeve, and a hand-knit cardigan. "How interesting," Ms. Peterson replied, her tone making the word sound like anything but a compliment. "Emma, take the empty seat in the back." Principal Warner had already turned to leave. "Her portfolio scored the highest marks from the district reviewer," he added. "Make her welcome." As Emma made her way to the empty desk, Miss Peterson continued, "As I was saying, presentation is everything. It separates those who will succeed from those who will not." She gestured toward the magazine covers. "These represent the standards of our industry." Emma quietly took out her notebook and began taking notes, seemingly unaware of the sidelong glances from her classmates. During the practical portion, students moved to the design tables. Emma opened her portfolio, revealing sketches of exceptional quality, designs that blended functionality with elegant aesthetics. Miss Peterson offered effusive praise to Brittany Caldwell, daughter of the town's most prominent real estate developer. Despite her mediocre sketches, when she reached Emma's table, she barely glanced at the portfolio. "Those designs are quaint," she said loudly. "Very Rural chic, I suppose, though I'm not sure patched clothing will ever make a comeback. Several students snickered. Emma looked up. These designs focus on sustainable fashion with reinforced stress points to extend garment life, she explained softly. The techniques are inspired by methods I learned from my grandmother. How folksy, Ms. Peterson replied. This is a course on fashion business, not home economics. Perhaps you've misunderstood the focus. She lifted one of Emma's sketches with 2 fingers. And this fabric choice would never be approved by any reputable designer. Actually, Emma replied quietly but firmly, that's hemp silk blend with natural dyes. It's being adopted by several sustainable luxury brands in Europe because of its durability and lower environmental impact. For a moment, Ms. Peterson seemed taken aback but quickly recovered. Well, I'm sure that's what someone told you. She addressed the class. Remember, students, there's a difference between fashion and farm wear. The comment elicited laughter. Emma's face remained composed, but her hands trembled slightly as she carefully returned her designs to her portfolio. As class ended, Ms. Peterson announced, "Tomorrow my former colleague from Vogue will be visiting. I expect everyone to dress appropriately for meeting an industry professional." Her gaze lingered on Emma. Those who can't manage appropriate attire might consider whether this course is the right fit for them. Emma was nearly to the door when Ms. Peterson called after her. "Miss Hayes, those boots may be practical for whatever it is you do after school, but they don't belong in my honors class. Neither does that patched dress. Tomorrow I expect to see you dressed as if you belong in a fashion course, or don't bother coming at all." Emma stood very still, then turned. "My boots and dress are clean and well-maintained, Miss Peterson. The dress was my mother's, and I patched it myself. I'm sorry they don't meet your standards." "It's not about meeting my standards," Miss Peterson replied dismissively. "It's about meeting industry standards. Fashion is about appearances, and appearances indicate where a person belongs. Not everyone belongs in the design world." Emma nodded. "Once, I understand how you feel about appearances. I'll remember that." With that, she left, her posture straight despite the weight of the teacher's judgment. As Emma walked to the old pickup truck waiting for her, she pulled out her phone. "Grandpa, it's Emma. How's your schedule tomorrow morning? There's someone at my new school I think you should meet." Behind the wheel, Emma's father, James Hayes, had witnessed his daughter's slumped shoulders. A rare sight from his typically resilient child. "Everything okay, sunshine?" he asked as she climbed in. Emma managed a small smile. "It will be, Dad. Grandpa's coming to visit tomorrow." James raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Your grandfather's flying in?" "He's supposed to be in Geneva until next week." "Plans change," Emma replied, looking out the window. "Sometimes people need to be reminded not to judge books by their covers." What neither Emma nor her father noticed was Ms. Peterson watching. From her classroom window, a satisfied smirk on her face as she saw the old pickup truck. In her mind, she had just confirmed everything she needed to know about whether Emma Hayes belonged in her prestigious course. She had no idea that her smug certainty was about to be shattered the very next morning. Dawn broke crisp and clear over Mountainview High School. The morning sun illuminated the brick buildings and cast long shadows across the empty football field. Miss Peterson arrived earlier than usual, carrying a premium coffee and an imported pastry. Today was important. Her former colleague Miranda Wells from Vogue would be visiting, a connection Miss Peterson had cultivated carefully to enhance her standing at the school. She wore her most expensive outfit, a designer suit she'd spent 2 months' salary on, paired with limited edition heels. Her platinum bob was freshly styled and her makeup impeccable. Image was everything, after all. Vice Principal Gonzalez intercepted her in the hallway, looking unusually concerned. "Victoria, there's been an unusual request this morning." "Oh?" Miss Peterson took a sip of her coffee, barely interested. Someone has requested permission to land a private aircraft on our football field. The district office called it in. Ms. Peterson nearly choked on her coffee. A what? On our field? That's absurd. Who would... The request came from Hayes Aerospace Industries, Gonzalez continued. Apparently their CEO needs to attend a meeting here and is on a tight schedule. Hayes Aerospace? Miss Peterson frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. Well, it's completely inappropriate. My guest from Vogue will be arriving soon, and I won't have some corporate helicopter disrupting our schedule. Gonzalez looked uncomfortable. The superintendent already approved it, and it's not a helicopter, it's a private jet. They're using the football field because it's the only flat space long enough. Security is already setting up the perimeter. Private jet? Here? Ms. Peterson scoffed. This must be some sort of publicity stunt. The vice principal handed her a tablet. You might want to see this. On the screen was an article about Hayes Aerospace Industries, a global leader in aviation technology and sustainable aircraft design. The corporation was valued at billions, with government contracts and revolutionary patents in eco-friendly aviation fuel. And there at the top of the article was a photo of the CEO, William Hayes, a distinguished silver-haired man in his late 60s, standing beside his company's latest prototype. Something about his eyes looked oddly familiar. This can't be connected. To our school, Miss Peterson insisted, handing back the tablet. Why would the CEO of Hayes Aerospace possibly need to land here? I don't know, Gonzalez replied, but he specifically requested a meeting with the administration and faculty from the design department. That's you, Victoria. A flutter of excitement replaced her annoyance. Perhaps this was an opportunity. A connection to Hayes Aerospace could benefit her career far more than reminiscing with her former colleague from Vogue. Maybe he wanted to establish a scholarship or internship program. Well then, she said, smoothing her jacket, we should prepare to welcome him properly. When is he arriving? Any minute now. The principal is already heading to the field. Miss Peterson hurriedly texted Miranda to reschedule their meeting, then joined the small crowd of administrators and curious faculty gathering near the football field. In the distance, a sleek white aircraft was circling, preparing to land. I've never seen anything like this, whispered the school secretary. Do you think he's considering a donation to the school? Obviously, Ms. Peterson replied confidently. My design program has been gaining recognition. Perhaps he's interested in supporting young talent. The Gulfstream G650 touched down with professional precision, its engines humming as it rolled to a stop at the far end of the field. It was an impressive sight, gleaming white with the Hayes Aerospace logo emblazoned on the tail. A small set of stairs unfolded from the door. The principal straightened his tie nervously as the door opened. First to emerge was a woman in a tailored business suit, clearly an executive assistant who surveyed the surroundings with practiced efficiency before nodding back toward the cabin. Next came a familiar figure that made Ms. Peterson's confident smile freeze on her face. James Hayes, Emma's father, the same man she had watched pick up Emma in that old pickup truck yesterday. But today he wasn't dressed in worn work clothes. He wore an impeccably tailored suit that even Ms. Peterson's fashion-trained eye could tell cost more than her entire wardrobe. And then William Hayes himself appeared at the top of the stairs. Tall and distinguished, with silver hair and the same hazel eyes as Emma, he carried himself with the natural authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and international negotiations. He wore no flashy accessories, just a simple, perfectly tailored suit and a vintage watch that Ms. Peterson, even from a distance, recognized as an ultra-rare timepiece worth more than her annual salary. Behind him came Emma, dressed in the same patched blue dress and worn boots from yesterday, a detail that confused Miss Peterson momentarily. Shouldn't the girl be wearing something better? As the Hayes family approached, the principal stepped forward, hand extended. "Mr. Hayes, welcome to Mountainview High. This is an unexpected honor." William Hayes shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for accommodating my unusual arrival. I apologize for the disruption, but I'm testifying before Congress this afternoon and needed to make this stop personally." His voice was deep and measured, carrying easily across the gathered crowd. "I understand. This is where my granddaughter is now attending school." The principal blinked in surprise, glancing at Emma. "Your granddaughter?" William placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "Yes, Emma transferred here yesterday. She's quite talented in design, though I understand there was some concern about her appearance in class." All eyes turned to Ms. Peterson, who stood frozen, her mind racing to process this turn of events. Emma's grandfather was William Hayes, the William Hayes whose company was featured in Fortune and Forbes, whose net worth was in the billions. "Ms. Peterson," the principal said, motioning her forward, "this is Mr. Hayes. His granddaughter is in your fashion design course." Ms. Peterson stepped forward automatically, her training in social niceties temporarily overriding her shock. "Mr. Hayes, what an unexpected pleasure. Had I known Emma was your granddaughter?" "Had you known," William interrupted smoothly, "would you have judged her differently, based on her family connections rather than her talent and character?" His tone remained pleasant, but there was steel beneath the politeness. Ms. Peterson faltered. That's not what I meant. We have certain standards in our program, and I merely suggested that Emma might want to consider her presentation more carefully." "Ah, yes, presentation." William nodded thoughtfully. "Emma mentioned you were quite focused on that. She also mentioned you barely looked at her portfolio before dismissing her designs as farmware." The principal's eyebrows shot up. "Ms. Peterson, is this true?" Before she could respond, William continued. "My granddaughter chose to wear her mother's dress yesterday, Mr. Principal. That patch you see? Emma sewed it herself when the fabric tore. Her mother, my daughter, wore that dress when she presented her first sustainable textile design to my board of directors, shortly before she and her husband were killed in an accident 5 years ago." A murmur ran through the gathered faculty. Miss Peterson felt the blood drain from her face. "Emma's boots," William continued, "were handmade by artisans using techniques that my company is now incorporating into our leather components for aircraft interiors, a project Emma helped develop. The cardigan was knitted by my late wife, Emma's grandmother, who taught her the value of craftsmanship and sustainability long before they became fashion buzzwords." Ms. Peterson swallowed hard. "Mr. Hayes, there appears to have been a misunderstanding. If Emma had explained, why should she have to explain?" James Hayes, Emma's father, spoke up. "Why should my daughter's worth be tied to her grandfather's name or her family's resources? Her work should speak for itself." William nodded in agreement. "Emma specifically asked not to use our family name when she transferred here. She wanted to be judged on her own merits, not her connections, a principle I've always admired in her." "Of course," Miss Peterson replied weakly, "and her portfolio is quite impressive." "You would know that if you'd actually looked at it," Emma said quietly, speaking for the first time. "Instead of just seeing my clothes." Miss Peterson struggled to recover her composure. "Emma, I value talent wherever I find it. Perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. I'd be delighted to feature your sustainable designs prominently in our upcoming showcase." William Hayes studied Miss Peterson with a gaze that had evaluated and terminated countless executives who failed to meet his standards. "Miss Peterson, I didn't come here seeking special treatment for my granddaughter. I came because I was concerned about the values being taught in your classroom." He turned to address the principal directly. "When Emma called me last night, she wasn't upset about being judged on her clothes. She was concerned about the other students in her class being taught that appearance and expensive brands determine a person's worth or talent. The principal looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Mr. Hayes, I assure you we don't endorse such values as an institution." "And yet," William replied, "your fashion design teacher explicitly told students that presentation is everything, and that their appearances indicate where a person belongs. That some people don't belong in the design world based on what they wear." Miss Peterson felt the weight of all eyes on her. "That's not exactly what I meant." "I have the class recording," Emma said softly, holding up her phone. "I started recording after you made Marissa cry about her non-designer handbag. Last week." Miss Peterson's eyes widened. "You recorded my class without permission? Ohio is a one-party consent state for recordings," James Hayes pointed out. "And the school policy only prohibits recording for disruptive or malicious purposes, not for documenting classroom content." William Hayes's expression softened slightly as he looked at his granddaughter. "Emma doesn't want you fired, Ms. Peterson. She actually thinks you have valuable industry knowledge to share. She just wants to ensure that all students are judged on their creativity and skills, not their economic background." The principal seized this opening. "Absolutely. Mountainview High prides itself on providing equal opportunities to all students. Perhaps this could be a learning moment for everyone involved." William nodded. "That's precisely what I suggested to my friend, the superintendent. Instead of filing a formal complaint, I've proposed establishing the Hayes Innovation Scholarship, which would provide funding for talented students from diverse economic backgrounds who demonstrate creativity in sustainable design, regardless of what they wear or where they come from." The principal's expression brightened considerably. "That's an extraordinarily generous proposal, Mr. Hayes. With one condition," William added. "The selection committee must use blind judging of portfolios and concepts. No names, no photos, no background information, just the work itself." That's an excellent approach," the principal agreed, shooting a meaningful look at Ms. Peterson. "I also understand from Emma that there are several talented students in the program who can't afford the materials for their final projects." William continued. "The Hayes Foundation will provide those resources, effective immediately." A sense of relief washed over Miss Peterson as she realized she wasn't going to be fired on the spot. But that relief was quickly tempered by the realization that her classroom would never be the same. Her carefully cultivated image as the arbiter of taste and status had been thoroughly undermined. "Ms. Peterson," William said, turning back to her, "Emma speaks highly of your technical knowledge. She hopes you'll continue as her teacher, assuming you can look beyond her boots and see the quality of her ideas." Put on the spot before her colleagues and superiors, Ms. Peterson managed a tight smile. "Of course, talent is what matters most." Emma looked directly at her teacher. "That's all I wanted, for everyone's talent to matter more than their clothes." As the impromptu meeting concluded and the group began walking toward the school buildings, Ms. Peterson found herself walking beside Emma. "You could have just told me who your grandfather was," she said quietly. "It would have saved us both this situation." Emma shook her head. "That's exactly the problem, Ms. Peterson. I shouldn't have. To be William Hayes's granddaughter, to be treated with respect. Neither should anyone else." As they reached the school entrance, Miranda Wells from Vogue was waiting, having arrived despite Miss Peterson's cancellation text. Her eyes widened as she recognized William Hayes. "Bill, what on earth are you doing here?" she exclaimed, air kissing his cheeks. "Miranda, what a pleasant surprise," William replied warmly. "I'm just visiting my granddaughter's school." Miranda turned to Emma with genuine interest. "You must be Emma. Your grandfather has shown me your sustainable textile designs. Brilliant concept, using regenerative fibers that way. We should feature it in our next generation spread." Miss Peterson stood speechless as her former colleague, her link to the prestigious world of high fashion, enthusiastically discussed technical design details with Emma, completely unbothered by the girl's patched dress and worn boots. Perhaps, Miss Peterson realized with dawning horror, she had been wrong about more than just Emma Hayes. The weeks following William Hayes's dramatic arrival at Mountain View High brought changes that rippled through the school community like stones dropped in still water. For Ms. Peterson, the transformation was both professional and personal, beginning with the most uncomfortable faculty meeting of her career. Principal Warner had called the design department together 2 days after the incident. "In light of recent events," he began, "we're implementing new evaluation criteria for all arts and design courses. Moving forward, initial project assessments will be conducted without student names or photos attached." Ms. Peterson sat stiffly in her chair, acutely aware of her colleagues' sidelong glances. The story of William Hayes's private jet landing and the subsequent confrontation had spread throughout the school with the speed of social media, growing more elaborate with each retelling. "Additionally," the principal continued, "the Hayes Foundation is establishing an innovation fund to provide materials for students who cannot afford them. Ms. Peterson will oversee the distribution of these resources." She nodded mechanically, understanding the subtext. This was her chance at redemption, or at least her opportunity to keep her job. And finally, Principal Warner concluded, looking directly at her, "all faculty are encouraged to attend the upcoming workshop on recognizing and addressing unconscious bias in education." The message was clear: adapt or face consequences. What stung most wasn't the implicit criticism, but the realization that it was deserved. As the meeting dispersed, the art teacher, Mrs. Rivera, paused beside her. "Don't beat yourself up too much, Victoria. We all have blind spots. The question is what we do once they're pointed out to us." Miss Peterson managed a tight smile. "I was just trying to maintain professional standards." "There's a difference between professional standards and class markers," Mrs. Rivera replied gently. "One is about quality and execution, the other is about money and status. I think maybe you lost sight of that distinction." The comment stayed with Miss Peterson as she walked to her classroom, where she found Emma Hayes already seated, early for class as usual. The girl was sketching intently, unaware of her teacher's presence. Miss Peterson paused in the doorway, seeing Emma, really seeing her, perhaps for the first time. Without the lens of prejudice, she noticed the precision in Emma's drafting technique, the careful attention to structural details that most students overlooked. Her worn boots were impeccably clean, the patched dress pressed and neat. Even her ancient backpack was organized with a designer's eye for efficiency. "Good morning, Emma," Miss Peterson said, setting down her materials. Emma looked up, her expression guarded but not hostile. "Good morning, Miss Peterson." An awkward silence stretched between them. Finally, Miss Peterson spoke. "I've been reviewing your portfolio more thoroughly. Your concept for biodegradable fashion accessories is quite innovative." "Thank you," Emma replied, surprised by the genuine compliment. "I'd like to understand more about your grandmother's textile techniques. They're similar to approaches I saw in Milan last year, but with interesting modifications." A spark of enthusiasm lit Emma's eyes. "My grandmother combined traditional methods with new technologies. She believed sustainability didn't mean sacrificing quality or aesthetics." To her own surprise, Miss Peterson found herself genuinely interested. "Would you be willing to demonstrate some of these techniques for the class? It aligns perfectly with our upcoming unit on innovative textiles." Emma studied her teacher's face, searching for signs of insincerity. Finding none, she nodded. "I'd like that." That tentative conversation marked the beginning of a subtle shift in Miss Peterson's classroom. The changes were small at first. She caught herself before making comments about students' clothing, focused more on technique than presentation, and made a conscious effort to evaluate work before checking whose it was. The Hayes Innovation Fund transformed the class dynamics in ways Miss Peterson hadn't anticipated. Students who had remained quiet, intimidated by their wealthier peers, began to participate more actively once they had equal access to quality materials. A boy named Tyler, whom she had previously dismissed as unmotivated, produced a jacket, design so technically sophisticated that she questioned whether he had created it himself, until she watched him work through an entire prototype during class. "Where did you learn these construction techniques?" she asked, examining his precise stitching. "My mom works at the industrial laundry facility," he explained. "I've been helping her repair uniforms since I was 10. You see the same stress points over and over, so you figure out how to reinforce them better." Ms. Peterson nodded, remembering Emma's similar comments about reinforced stress points that she had dismissed as folksy. "That's valuable practical knowledge," she acknowledged. "Perhaps you could collaborate with Emma on her sustainable workwear project. Your construction techniques would complement her material innovations." The smile that spread across Tyler's face at being recognized for his skills rather than criticized for his discount store clothes gave Ms. Peterson an unexpected feeling of satisfaction, more genuine than she'd felt when cultivating favor with wealthy parents or name-dropping her fashion industry connections. 6 weeks after William Hayes's visit, the classroom environment had transformed. The design tables were arranged in collaborative clusters rather than hierarchical rows. Students from various backgrounds worked together, evaluating each other's designs based on innovation and execution rather than brand names or cost. Mrs. Peterson found herself learning alongside her students, particularly about sustainable practices that hadn't been taught when she attended design school. The most profound change came during the mid-semester showcase. Traditionally, this event had been dominated by the wealthiest students, whose parents could afford professional quality materials and even outside assistance. This time, Ms. Peterson implemented blind judging, with projects identified only by numbers until after the evaluations were complete. The results were revelatory. Emma's sustainable activewear concept placed first, as Ms. Peterson might have expected. But second place went to Tyler's reinforced workwear design, and third to a girl named Marissa, the same student who had been humiliated about her non-designer handbag, who created an innovative collection using repurposed materials. When the winners were announced at the showcase event, attended by parents and local design professionals, Ms. Peterson noticed William Hayes standing quietly at the back of the room. He hadn't announced his visit, and unlike last time, he was dressed casually enough to blend in with the other parents. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. After the presentations, he approached her. "Quite a different atmosphere from what Emma described when she first joined your class," he observed. Ms. Peterson straightened her shoulders. "We've made some adjustments to our approach." "So I see." His expression remained neutral, but his voice carried a hint of approval. "Emma tells me you've been incorporating sustainability principles into your curriculum." "Yes." Ms. Peterson found herself standing taller. "It's become clear that the future of design lies in sustainable innovation, not just aesthetic trends. Your granddaughter has been instrumental in helping us develop that focus." William Hayes studied her for a moment. "You know, Ms. Peterson, in my business career, I found that the most valuable people aren't those who never make mistakes. They're the ones who can recognize their errors and adapt accordingly." He glanced around at the student projects displayed throughout the room. "It appears you fall into the latter category." Coming from William Hayes, the observation felt like high praise. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes, though I wish I had recognized certain things sooner." "Better late than never," he replied. Which reminds me, Miranda Wells called me last week. Vogue is planning a special issue on sustainable fashion innovation in education. She mentioned featuring your program. Ms. Peterson blinked in surprise. Really? I haven't heard from Miranda since she met Emma, William finished with a slight smile. She was impressed by the concept work she saw that day, and even more impressed when Emma mentioned it was part of a class project you'd assigned on sustainable materials. That was Emma's independent project, Ms. Peterson admitted. I can't take credit for it, but you can take credit for creating an environment where it could develop, William countered. According to Emma, that's exactly what you've done these past few weeks. Progress deserves recognition, Ms. Peterson. As William moved away to congratulate the student winners, Ms. Peterson found herself approached by James Hayes, Emma's father. Mr. Hayes, she greeted him, still somewhat uncomfortable given their last encounter. Emma's work is exceptional. You must be very proud. I am, he agreed, though I'm not surprised. She's always had her mother's eye for design and her grandfather's problem-solving ability. He paused, then added, but I'm particularly pleased by how she's found her place in your class. She was worried the first few weeks. I regret that, Miss Peterson said sincerely. Your daughter has taught me as much as I've taught her, perhaps more. James nodded thoughtfully. You know, I could have sent Emma to a private arts academy. Her grandfather certainly offered. But I wanted her to stay connected to our community, to understand the real world where most people live and work. He gestured to the diverse group of students celebrating together. This, what you've built here over the past few weeks, this is exactly why we stayed. As James walked away to join his daughter, Ms. Peterson realized something had fundamentally shifted within her. The validation she had once desperately sought from fashion industry connections or wealthy parents now seemed shallow compared to the genuine satisfaction of seeing students grow based on their actual talents rather than their socio-economic backgrounds. Later that evening, as she packed up after the showcase, Emma approached her desk. Ms. Peterson, I wanted to thank you for pairing me with Tyler on the workwear project. His construction techniques solved problems I'd been struggling with for months. You're welcome, Ms. Peterson replied, though I should be thanking you. I nearly missed recognizing his talent. Emma considered this, then said, my mom used to say that good design isn't about making things look expensive. It's about making them work beautifully, regardless of cost. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable designer, Ms. Peterson said. She was. Emma hesitated, then added, I have some of her original sketches at home. Would you like to see them sometime? Dad says her process notebooks could be valuable teaching tools. The invitation, a gesture of trust from a student she had once humiliated, meant more to Miss Peterson than any industry connection ever had. I'd be honored, Emma, truly. As Emma left with her father and grandfather, Miss Peterson remained in her classroom, looking around at the space that had transformed, along with her perspective. The sign that had once proclaimed, "Presentation is everything," had been replaced with a new one, innovation, sustainability, craftsmanship. The words reflected values that reached beyond mere appearances to something more meaningful and enduring. For the first time in years, Victoria Peterson felt like a teacher rather than just a fashion industry gatekeeper. And surprisingly, it felt far more satisfying than she could have imagined. The spacious auditorium of the Hayes Center for Sustainable Design buzzed with excitement. Industry leaders, educators, and media representatives filled the seats, while talented young designers nervously adjusted their portfolios backstage. Outside, banners announced the 5th annual Hayes Foundation Emerging Designers Competition, now one of the most prestigious events for discovering new talent in sustainable fashion. Among the judges seated in the front row was Victoria Peterson, whose career had taken an unexpected turn since the day a private jet landed on a high school football field. She no longer taught at Mountainview High. Instead, she served as the Director of Education for the Hayes Foundation's design initiative, overseeing programs that had been implemented in over 40 schools nationwide. "Nervous?" asked William Hayes, taking his seat beside her. At 73, he remained sharp and commanding, though he had officially stepped back from day-to-day operations at Hayes Aerospace to focus on the Foundation's work. "Always," Victoria admitted with a smile, "but it's a good kind of nervous. The caliber of talent keeps improving each year. That's largely thanks to your program," William replied. "Who would have thought a fashion teacher and an aerospace engineer would revolutionize design education?" Victoria laughed softly. "Certainly not me 5 years ago." The lights dimmed, and Emma Hayes walked confidently onto the stage. At 21, she had blossomed into a poised young woman, though she still possessed the quiet determination that had characterized her as a teenager. She had traded her mother's patched dress for her own designs, a sophisticated yet practical ensemble that embodied her philosophy of sustainable luxury. "Welcome to the 5th Annual Hayes Foundation Emerging Designers Competition," Emma began, her clear voice carrying throughout the auditorium. "What began as a small showcase for my high school design class has grown into something none of us could have imagined." Victoria felt a surge of pride mixed with humility as she remembered that first showcase years ago, how different things had been before her confrontation with Emma and her grandfather. "This year," Emma continued, "we received over 3,000 submissions from students at more than 500 schools across the country. Each design was evaluated without names or schools attached, judged solely on innovation, sustainability, and execution." From her prime position, Victoria could see James Hayes beaming with pride as he watched his daughter command the stage. Beside him sat Tyler Barnes, now Emma's business partner and fiancé, the same boy whose talent Victoria had nearly overlooked because of his discount store clothes and quiet demeanor. "Before we introduce our finalists," Emma said, "I'd like to recognize the person whose vision transformed this competition from a local event into a national platform for discovering diverse talent. 5 years ago, she taught me that presentation isn't everything, but courage to change and grow might be. Please welcome Victoria Peterson, Director of Education for the Hayes Design Initiative." The applause caught Victoria by surprise as she rose to join Emma on stage. This had not been on the program they'd rehearsed. "Thank you, Emma," she said, momentarily flustered by the unexpected recognition. "Though I think we all know that without your grandfather's dramatic entrance and your quiet persistence, none of this would exist." A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. The story of William Hayes landing his private jet at a high school had become something of a legend in design circles. 5 years ago," Victoria continued, finding her voice, "I stood in a classroom teaching students that their worth as designers was tied to their appearance and background. I was wrong." She paused, letting the words settle. "What we've discovered through the blind evaluation process is that exceptional talent exists everywhere, in rural communities and urban centers, in wealthy suburbs and struggling neighborhoods. The next generation of innovative design doesn't come from anyone, zip code or economic background." As Victoria returned to her seat, the main event began. 10 finalists from diverse backgrounds presented collections that pushed boundaries of sustainable design in ways that continually amazed her. The winner, a 17-year-old from an underfunded school in Appalachia who had created a revolutionary process for transforming agricultural waste into luxury textiles, reminded Victoria once again how easily such talent could have been overlooked in her former evaluation system. After the ceremony, at the reception that followed, Victoria found herself approached by a fashion magazine editor she had once desperately tried to impress. "The Hayes initiative is quite the success story," the editor commented. "I understand you're expanding to international schools next year?" "Yes," Victoria confirmed. "We're starting pilot programs in India, Ghana, and Brazil. There's incredible innovation happening in textile sustainability in those regions. Quite a departure from teaching high school fashion classes," the editor observed. "Do you miss the prestige of your New York connections?" Victoria glanced across the room, where Emma and Tyler were deep in conversation with their newest scholarship recipients, talented teenagers from backgrounds that would have once been dismissed in her classroom. "Not at all," she replied honestly. "What we're building here has purpose beyond prestige." The editor seemed puzzled by her genuine lack of interest in fashion industry status, but Victoria had long since stopped measuring success by such metrics. Later, as the event wound down, William Hayes joined her on the balcony overlooking the center's sustainable garden. "I've been meaning to tell you," he said. "The board approved your proposal for the vocational program expansion. We'll be implementing your curriculum in 20 more technical schools next fall." "That's wonderful news," Victoria replied. "Those schools have extraordinary talent in practical construction and textile innovation." William nodded in agreement. "You know, when I landed that jet on your football field, I was just a grandfather angry about his granddaughter being humiliated. I never imagined where it would lead," Victoria smiled. "Nor did I. I was terrified I was about to be fired in the most spectacular way possible." "I considered it," William admitted with a chuckle. "But Emma insisted you deserved a chance to reconsider. Your approach." He gazed thoughtfully over the garden. "She saw something in you that I missed initially." "Your granddaughter has remarkable insight," Victoria acknowledged. "She understood something I didn't, that my fixation on appearances was really about my own insecurities. I was using external validation to measure my worth, so naturally I imposed the same flawed metric on my students." William considered this. "It takes courage to confront one's own biases. Many never do." "I had good motivation," Victoria replied, glancing toward Emma, who was now showing her latest designs to a group of scholarship recipients. "Your granddaughter challenged me to be better, not by demanding special treatment, but by questioning the entire foundation of how I evaluated talent." 10 years later, the prestigious auditorium of the Global Sustainable Fashion Summit was filled to capacity. Industry leaders, environmental advocates, and design visionaries from around the world had gathered for the keynote address from Emma Hayes Barnes, now 31, and recognized globally for revolutionizing sustainable fashion production. In the front row sat her proud family. Her father James, her grandfather William, now in his early 80s but still sharp as ever, her husband Tyler, and their 4-year-old daughter Catherine, named after Emma's mother. Beside them sat Victoria Peterson, now 62, her once platinum blonde hair elegantly silver, her demeanor reflecting the wisdom accumulated through a decade of transformative work. The enormous screen behind the stage displayed the conference theme, "Beyond Appearance, Redefining Value in Fashion." As Emma took the stage, applause thundered through the auditorium. 10 years ago, Emma began, a small classroom incident sparked a conversation about how we value design and, more importantly, designers. What began as a personal experience has grown into a global movement to recognize talent wherever it exists and to create pathways for that talent to flourish. Victoria listened with a full heart as Emma detailed the impact of their shared work. Over 5,000 scholarships awarded, sustainable design programs implemented in 32 countries, and countless careers launched that might otherwise have been stifled by systemic barriers. The Hayes-Peterson method, as it's now known, has demonstrated conclusively that when we remove superficial barriers and evaluate based on merit alone, we discover extraordinary innovation from unexpected sources. Emma continued, "Our blind evaluation process has been adopted by design schools worldwide, and the results speak for themselves." The screen behind her displayed statistics showing the demographic diversity of scholarship recipients and the measurable environmental impact of their sustainable innovations. The numbers were impressive, but Victoria knew they represented something more profound, a fundamental shift in how talent was recognized and nurtured. "None of this would have been possible," Emma said, "without the courage of one teacher who was willing to reconsider deeply held beliefs about worth and value in design." She gestured toward Victoria in the front row. Victoria Peterson could have remained entrenched in traditional evaluations based on appearance and status. Instead, she embraced a new paradigm that has transformed not just education, but the industry itself. Victoria felt a lump in her throat as the audience applauded. The journey from that mortifying confrontation to this moment had been filled with challenges, moments of doubt, and profound growth. She remembered clearly the turning point, not the dramatic arrival of William's jet, but the quieter moment afterward when she had truly seen her own prejudices for what they were. After Emma's keynote, the summit transitioned to panel discussions on implementing sustainable practices in fashion education. Victoria found herself approached by a young teacher who looked vaguely familiar. "Ms. Peterson? I'm not sure if you remember me. Marissa Chen? I was in your class at Mountainview." "Hi, right when everything changed." Victoria's eyes widened with recognition. "Marissa, of course I remember you. Your repurposed materials project won third place in our first showcase." Marissa smiled. "That recognition changed my life. I'm now teaching sustainable design at my old middle school in Henderson County. We just received our first Hayes Foundation grant to establish a maker space for students." "That's wonderful," Victoria replied warmly. "How are your students responding to the program?" "They're thriving," Marissa said. "Especially the ones who remind me of myself at that age, creative but unsure they belong in design because they don't have the right clothes or background." She hesitated, then added, "I've always wanted to thank you, not just for eventually seeing my potential, but for showing us that people can change. Watching your transformation taught me as much as the design principles." As Marissa moved on to another discussion group, Victoria found herself momentarily overwhelmed by the ripple effects of what had begun as the most humiliating professional experience of her career. William Hayes appeared at her elbow, somehow sensing her emotional moment. "Quite something, isn't it?" he observed. "To see how far things have come." Victoria nodded, composing herself. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't landed that jet on our football field." William chuckled. "I've developed a reputation for dramatic entrances, but the real change happened afterward, in thousands of small moments when you chose to see differently." "I had help," Victoria acknowledged. "Emma never gave up on the possibility that I could change." "She gets that from her mother," William said softly. "Catherine always believed people could grow beyond their limitations." They watched as Emma expertly fielded questions from the audience, her answers reflecting both technical expertise and the compassionate perspective that had been her hallmark since high school. "Did I ever tell you," William said, "that the day I flew to your school, I was prepared to remove Emma immediately and enroll her in an exclusive design academy in New York?" "I'd already made the arrangements." "No," Victoria replied, surprised. "What changed your mind?" "Emma did. On the flight back to Geneva, she told me she wanted to stay at Mountainview. She said there were other students like her, talented, but overlooked, who needed the program to change, not just for her to escape it." He shook his head in admiration. "At 16, she already understood something it took me decades in business to learn, that meaningful change requires staying, engaged with the problem, not just finding a personal workaround. The summit continued for 3 more days, with Victoria leading workshops on implementing blind evaluation methods in design education. On the final evening, a special exhibition showcased the work of Hayes Foundation scholarship recipients from the past decade. The diverse array of innovative designs, from biodegradable textiles to zero-waste production methods, represented a revolution in how sustainable fashion was conceived and created. As Victoria walked through the exhibition with Emma, they paused before a display honoring Catherine Hayes, Emma's mother, whose early work in sustainable textiles had been decades ahead of its time. "Mum would have loved all this," Emma said quietly, "especially seeing design students from all backgrounds having their work evaluated on merit alone." Victoria nodded. "Your mother's dress, the one with the patch that I criticized so harshly, where is it now?" Emma smiled. "Preserved in an archival box. I take it out sometimes to show Catherine. I tell her the story of how her grandmother's patched dress helped change an entire industry." "I'm sorry I didn't recognize its value then," Victoria said. "But that's the point, isn't it?" Emma replied. "We all learn to look beyond the surface, even me." She gestured around the exhibition. "All of this exists because one day a teacher made a mistake, a grandfather made a dramatic entrance, and then, most importantly, people chose to grow rather than simply assign blame." As they completed their circuit of the exhibition, they were met by William, James, Tyler, and little Catherine, who ran to her mother with a drawing clutched in her hand. "Look, Mommy, I designed a dress," the child announced proudly, displaying a colorful crayon creation. Emma knelt to examine the drawing with serious attention. "Tell me about your design choices, sweetheart." As the child earnestly explained her color selections and the super-strong stitches she had included in her drawing, Victoria caught William's eye. They shared a knowing smile. The future of design stood before them, in a 4-year-old with mismatched socks and unruly hair, being taken completely seriously as a designer. That night, as Victoria packed for her return flight, she found a small package in her hotel room with a note from Emma. Inside was a framed photograph of Emma's fashion design class from Mountainview High, taken shortly after the jet incident, as they now jokingly called it. The students stood in a diverse group around their teacher, their faces reflecting a newfound sense of possibility. The note read simply, "The day appearances stopped defining potential. Thank you for having the courage to see differently." Emma Victoria placed the photo carefully in her carry-on, a reminder of how a moment of humiliation had transformed into a lifetime of purpose. Who would have thought that a teacher's cruel mockery and a grandfather's dramatic response could spark a revolution in how talent was recognized? But then again, the most profound changes often begin in unexpected ways, sometimes with a private jet landing on a high school football field and a teacher willing to learn from her own mistakes. 20 years later, the Hayes Institute for Sustainable Design stood as an architectural marvel on what had once been farmland outside Henderson County. Its glass and reclaimed timber structure reflected the philosophy it embodied, merging innovation with tradition, sustainability with functionality, and accessibility with excellence. Solar panels, elegantly integrated into the curved roof, captured energy while carefully designed water systems harvested rainwater for the surrounding gardens. Inside the central atrium, students from around the world collaborated in open workspaces, while the walls displayed a rotating exhibition of groundbreaking, sustainable designs. But the most prominent installation, positioned where visitors couldn't miss it, was a simple glass case containing a child's blue dress with a carefully sewn patch on one sleeve, alongside a pair of well-worn boots. Dr. Catherine Hayes Barnes, now 24 and recently graduated with a doctorate in biomaterials engineering, guided a group of visiting educators through the institute her mother had founded and that she now helped direct. "And this," she explained, stopping at the display, "is where our story began. My mother's childhood dress and boots became the catalyst for what we now call the authentic assessment revolution in design education." The visitors leaned forward, reading the plaque that accompanied the modest garments. These clothes, once mocked for appearing unsuitable in a design classroom, launched a global movement to evaluate talent based on merit rather than appearance or background. Never judge potential by its packaging. "My mother still tells the story," Catherine continued, "of how her high school teacher rejected her based on these clothes, only to have my great-grandfather land his private jet on the football field the next day." She smiled at the visitors' surprised expressions. "It sounds dramatic, but that moment changed how we identify and nurture talent worldwide." Among the visiting educators was an older woman who stood slightly apart from the group, studying the display with particular intensity. Her silver hair was elegantly styled, and though she was in her 70s, Victoria Peterson carried herself with the dignity of someone who had found genuine purpose in her later years. Catherine noticed her and moved to her side. "Miss Peterson, Mum mentioned you might join the tour today." Victoria nodded, her eyes still on the patched dress. "After all these years, it still humbles me to see it, to remember." "Mum says it was never about the confrontation," Catherine replied. "It was about what happened afterward, how you chose to become part of the solution." Victoria smiled. "Your mother has always been generous in her interpretation of events. I was quite resistant at first." As the tour group moved on to examine the Institute's advanced textile laboratory, Victoria remained behind, lost in reflection. After a moment, she was joined by Emma Hayes Barnes, now 51, and an internationally recognized leader in sustainable design education. "I thought I might find you here," Emma said warmly, embracing her former teacher and now longtime colleague. "It's been too long, Victoria." 3 years, Victoria agreed, "since the Stockholm conference." They stood together, looking at the display that commemorated their shared history. "When we decided to include your dress in the Institute's central exhibition," Victoria said, "I worried it might seem like we were dwelling on past mistakes rather than future possibilities." Emma shook her head. "It's not about the mistake. It's about the transformation that followed. That's why students and visitors respond to it, because it represents how growth begins with recognition." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. 20 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. And sometimes, Emma added, it feels like another lifetime. She gestured toward the bustling atrium where students from diverse backgrounds worked on projects that would have been unimaginable 2 decades earlier. "I never dreamed that day would lead to all this." "Your grandfather would be proud," Victoria said softly. William Hayes had passed away 5 years earlier at the age of 88, leaving behind a legacy that extended far beyond his aerospace innovations to the educational revolution he had helped spark. "He was proud," Emma affirmed, "especially of how the Hayes-Peterson method spread beyond design education. Did you know there are now over 200 universities using blind assessment protocols for everything from art portfolios to engineering projects?" As they walked together through the institute, they passed classrooms where students were developing compostable packaging, biodegradable textiles, and solar-integrated clothing. In each space, diversity was evident, not just in the students' backgrounds but in their approaches to problem-solving. "The annual report came in yesterday," Emma mentioned as they entered her office. "The data continues to support what we've always believed, that when barriers of appearance, background, and connection are removed, we discover talent in the most unexpected places." She handed Victoria a tablet displaying the report. The statistics were impressive. Graduation rates 22% higher than traditional programs, patent applications 35% above the national average for design schools, and industry placement success exceeding 94%. Numbers don't tell the whole story, though, Emma continued, taking a seat behind her desk. The real measure is in the innovations our graduates are bringing to market. Sustainable solutions that might never have developed if we were still judging designers by their clothes or connections. Victoria set down the tablet, her expression turning reflective. "I've been thinking about retirement," she admitted. 72 seems like a reasonable age to step back from active administration. Emma looked surprised. "You're still at the top of your game, Victoria. Your mentorship program has been our most successful initiative." "Perhaps," Victoria acknowledged. "But I've been considering writing a book, documenting our journey from that confrontation to the educational model we've created. I think the story could benefit others facing similar institutional challenges." "That's not retirement," Emma observed with a smile. "That's just changing focus." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. James Hayes, now in his 70s but still robust, entered with Catherine and a teenage girl Victoria didn't recognize. "Sorry to interrupt," James said, "but I thought Victoria would want to meet our newest Hayes scholar." The girl stepped forward shyly. "Ms. Peterson, I'm Marina Fernandez. I just wanted to thank you personally for the scholarship. I never thought someone like me could attend a place like this." Victoria studied the girl with interest. "And why is that, Marina?" "Well," Marina hesitated, "at my school, the design teacher said my techniques were too homemade to be taken seriously. I learned sewing from my grandmother, not formal classes." Emma and Victoria exchanged a knowing glance. "Marina's portfolio received the highest technical scores in our blind evaluation," Catherine explained. "Her methods for reinforcing stress, points in performance wear are actually more effective than current industry standards." "Techniques learned from your grandmother?" Victoria asked. Marina nodded. "She was a seamstress for 40 years. She can't afford fancy materials, but she taught me how to make things last." Victoria smiled. "Sustainability at its most fundamental. I'd love to hear more about these techniques." As Marina enthusiastically explained her grandmother's methods, Victoria felt a profound sense of completion. Here, 20 years after she had dismissed Emma for her folksy techniques learned from her grandmother, was another generation proving that innovation often came from unexpected sources and traditional knowledge. Later, as Victoria prepared to leave the institute, she found herself once more before the display containing Emma's childhood dress and boots. A class of first-year students had gathered around it, listening as Emma explained its significance. "The lesson isn't just about how we judge others," Emma was saying. "It's about recognizing that innovation can come from anywhere, that the next revolutionary idea might come from someone wearing patched clothes or someone in couture. What matters is creating systems that allow us to see the idea rather than just the packaging it comes in." A student raised her hand. "But haven't we solved this problem now, with blind evaluations and merit-based assessments?" Emma smiled. "We've addressed one manifestation of it, but the human tendency to judge based on appearance is persistent. Each generation must remain vigilant against new forms of the same bias." Victoria slipped quietly into the back of the group, listening as Emma fielded more questions. The sight of her former student, now an internationally respected educator and innovator, teaching the next generation about looking beyond appearances, filled her with a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in how far they had come, humility at remembering her own role in the story's beginning, and gratitude for the second chance she had been given. After the students dispersed, Emma noticed Victoria and crossed to join her. "Your retirement book," Emma said. "What will you call it?" Victoria considered for a moment, then gestured toward the patched dress. Perhaps The Patch, How a Mended Dress Repaired Design Education. Emma laughed. I like it, though Grandpa would probably suggest something with more dramatic flair. Jets, grit, and transformation, perhaps. As they walked together toward the Institute's entrance, they passed walls lined with photographs documenting their 20-year journey. The first Hayes Foundation showcase, the opening of International, programs, awards, ceremonies, and candid moments of students from all backgrounds collaborating on revolutionary designs. You know, Emma said as they reached the main doors, when I called my grandfather that day after your class, I wasn't seeking revenge or special treatment. I just wanted someone to see that judging design talent by appearance was fundamentally flawed. And now that principle is taught in design programs worldwide, Victoria noted. Because your grandfather had the resources to make a dramatic point, and you had the wisdom to channel that moment towards systemic change rather than personal vindication. Emma nodded. And because you had the courage to reconsider deeply held beliefs. That's the part of the story students find most compelling, not my grandfather's jet or my patched dress, but your willingness to grow. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Institute's sustainable gardens. Students moved between buildings, carrying portfolios and material samples, their diverse appearances a visual representation of the Institute's core. Philosophy. Victoria paused to take in the scene. 20 years ago, I believed presentation was everything, she said quietly. I couldn't have been more wrong. It's transformation that matters, the ability to recognize error and choose a different path. As if to underscore her point, a young man in worn jeans and a hand-mended shirt walked past, deep in conversation with a woman in impeccable designer clothing. They were reviewing a prototype, clearly collaborating as equals in the creative process. There goes the future, Emma observed with satisfaction. Indeed, Victoria agreed, judged not by its covering but by its content. As Victoria finally took her leave, walking toward the parking area where her modest electric car waited, she reflected on the long arc of her journey from that confrontational morning when a private jet landed on a high school football field. What had begun as her most humiliating professional moment had become the foundation for her most meaningful work. The Institute stood behind her, its innovative design catching the golden light of sunset, a physical manifestation of what could happen when talent was recognized regardless of its packaging. And although the story of the fashion teacher who mocked a farm girl's clothes would always be part of its origin, the legacy extended far beyond that moment to the thousands of lives transformed because appearances had ceased to be the measure of potential. Victoria smiled to herself as she drove away. Some lessons arrived in dramatic fashion, via private jets and public confrontations, but the most important learning happened in the quiet moments afterward, when one chose to see differently and better. That, perhaps, was the greatest design innovation of all. 30 years later, the auditorium of the United Nations headquarters in New York fell silent as the Secretary-General introduced the recipient of this year's Global Innovation Award for Educational Transformation. On the massive screens behind the podium, images cycled through the remarkable 30-year journey of the Hayes Initiative, from a confrontation at a small-town high school to a worldwide movement that had fundamentally changed how talent was recognized and nurtured. Few educational methodologies have demonstrated such profound and measurable impact across cultures and disciplines, the Secretary-General stated. The Hayes-Peterson method has not only transformed design education, but has become a model for equitable assessment in fields ranging from scientific research to artistic expression. Today, we honor the woman whose vision expanded this approach, from a single classroom to a global standard. In the front row, Dr. Catherine Hayes Barnes, now 34, and the newly appointed director of the Global Hayes Foundation, watched with pride as her mother made her way to the podium. Emma Hayes Barnes, at 61, moved with the same quiet dignity that had characterized her since youth, though silver now streaked her chestnut hair and wisdom lines framed her still bright eyes. 30 years ago, Emma began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, a teacher told me that my patched dress and worn boots didn't belong in her classroom. That moment could have remained a simple rejection, painful but ultimately insignificant in the greater scheme of things. Instead, through a series of choices made by several people, it became the catalyst for reconsidering how we evaluate human potential. Catherine glanced around the International Assembly, noting representatives from the 87 countries that had now implemented Hayes Foundation programs in their educational systems. Beside her sat her husband, Dr. Alejandro Vega, leading researcher in sustainable textiles, and their 10-year-old twins, William and Victoria, named for their great-grandfather, and the teacher whose transformation had been as central to the story as Emma's rejection. The true innovation we celebrate today, Emma continued, isn't technological but philosophical. It's the radical notion that talent deserves recognition regardless of its packaging, that the next world-changing idea might come from someone in homemade clothes or designer labels, from rural farms or urban centers, from established institutions or unexpected sources. In the audience, Victoria Peterson listened with emotion. At 82, she had become somewhat frail physically, but her mind remained sharp. Her book, The Patch Mending Education Through Authentic Assessment, had become standard reading. In teacher training programs worldwide, now she watched as her former student, who had taught her more than she had ever taught Emma, received global recognition for the movement they had built together. "I accept this honor," Emma said, "on behalf of a remarkable collaboration that spans 3 generations. My grandfather, William Hayes, whose dramatic arrival by private jet made our story impossible to ignore. My father, James Hayes, whose quiet dignity and support never wavered. My daughter, Catherine, who has expanded our work into new frontiers, and most importantly, Victoria Peterson, the teacher who demonstrated that the most profound credential in education is not authority, but the willingness to learn and grow." Victoria blinked back tears as applause filled the hall. Never in her most ambitious moments as a young fashion teacher had she imagined receiving acknowledgement at the United Nations. Her journey from fashion-obsessed teacher to educational pioneer had been neither direct nor easy, but sitting here now, watching the global impact of their shared work, she felt a sense of purpose fulfilled. After the ceremony, at the reception in the UN's North Delegates Lounge, Victoria found herself approached by an elegant woman in her 50s whom she didn't immediately recognize. "Ms. Peterson? I'm Marissa Chen Williams. I don't know if you remember me. I was in your class at Mountainview High during what we now call the Jet Incident." Victoria's face lit with recognition. "Marissa, of course I remember you. You visited with us at the summit 20 years ago. You were teaching sustainable design at your old middle school." Marissa nodded, pleased to be remembered. "That's right. Now I'm the Education Minister for Singapore. We've implemented the Hayes-Peterson method throughout our national curriculum, and the results have been remarkable, particularly in identifying talents in children from less advantaged backgrounds." "That's wonderful to hear," Victoria replied. "Singapore has always been a leader in educational innovation." "We're hosting the International Conference on Equitable Assessment next spring," Marissa said. "We'd be honored if you could deliver the keynote address. Many of us who have implemented these methods globally consider you the philosophical architect of the approach." Victoria was momentarily speechless. From teacher to keynote speaker at an international conference, the journey still sometimes amazed her. "I'd be honored," she finally responded, "though at 82 I've been trying to limit my travel." "We understand completely," Marissa assured her. We could arrange for virtual participation if needed. Your insights remain invaluable to educators worldwide. As Marissa moved on to greet other guests, Victoria found herself joined by Emma and Catherine, both glowing from the day's recognition. "Enjoying your rock star status, Victoria?" Emma teased gently, guiding her former teacher to a quieter corner of the reception. Victoria laughed. "Hardly that, though I must admit being recognized as an educational innovator rather than a fashion authority is still somewhat surreal." "Your book changed how institutions think about assessment," Catherine noted. "Last month, even the Royal Academy of Sciences implemented blind review protocols based on your recommendations." The three women stood together, watching the international gathering of educators, policymakers, and innovators who had been influenced by their work. Young William and Victoria darted through the crowd, collecting signatures from representatives of different countries in small notebooks they had brought for the purpose. "Grandma," William called out, rushing up to Emma. "The delegate from Kenya says they use your method to find engineers in rural communities." Emma smiled, ruffling her grandson's hair. "And did you thank her for sharing that?" "Yes," he replied earnestly. "And Victoria asked about their sustainability programs too." The adults exchanged amused glances as the children raced off again, boundless in their enthusiasm. "They're quite the pair," Victoria observed. "Named for significant figures in their family history, yet entirely themselves." "Much like the programs bearing our names," Emma agreed. "They've evolved far beyond what we initially envisioned." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "The applications continue to expand. The Hayes Foundation just launched a partnership with the International Space Agency to implement blind assessment protocols for their innovation challenges. They're specifically looking to identify solutions from non-traditional sources." "Space technology?" Victoria raised an eyebrow. "We've come quite a long way from fashion design class." "The principles transfer remarkably well," Catherine explained. "By removing identifying information and evaluating purely on merit, they've already discovered breakthrough approaches from contributors who might otherwise have been overlooked due to institutional bias." Later that evening, the Hayes family hosted a private dinner at a restaurant overlooking Central Park. Along with Victoria, they had invited key figures from the 30-year journey of the Hayes Initiative, educators who had implemented the methodology, former students who had benefited from it, and representatives from partner organizations worldwide. During the meal, Emma clinked her glass to gain everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, rising from her seat. 30 years ago today, a private jet landed on a high school football field because a grandfather was outraged that his granddaughter had been judged by her clothes rather than her talents. Appreciative chuckles rippled through the gathering. "My grandfather was known for dramatic gestures," Emma continued with a fond smile. "But the real transformation happened afterward, in thousands of quieter moments, when people chose to see differently, to evaluate truly, and to recognize potential in all its diverse forms." She raised her glass higher. "To William Hayes, whose landing created a clearing in which new ideas could take root. To Victoria Peterson, who had the courage to grow beyond comfortable conventions. And to everyone who has carried this work forward, may we continue to find brilliance wherever it exists, regardless of its packaging." As glasses clinked around the table, Victoria found herself overwhelmed by the moment. James Hayes, now in his late 70s, leaned over to her. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you'd simply been kind to Emma that first day," he said quietly. "If you'd welcomed her regardless of her clothes." Victoria considered this. "I've thought about that often. The Hayes Initiative might never have existed. Your father might never have landed that jet. I might have continued teaching students to value appearance over substance." James nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps some lessons require dramatic confrontation," "Do take root, perhaps," Victoria agreed, "though I wish I could have learned mine with less public humiliation." They shared a smile, the decades having transformed old wounds into shared understanding. After dinner, as the celebration continued, Victoria found a quiet moment with Emma on the restaurant's terrace, overlooking the twinkling lights of Central Park. "Did you ever imagine this?" Victoria asked, gesturing toward the gathering inside. "That day in my classroom when I mocked your clothes, did you ever dream it would lead to global educational reform?" Emma shook her head. "Never. I just wanted to be judged fairly on my work, and when that didn't happen, I wanted to ensure others wouldn't face the same barriers." She paused, looking out over the New York skyline. "But I think my grandfather saw the potential for broader change immediately. He understood how systems work and how strategic disruption can transform them." Victoria smiled. "William Hayes was indeed a visionary, though I didn't appreciate his methods at the time. He respected you enormously, you know," Emma said, "especially after you embraced change rather than resisting it. He told me once that in business he'd learned the true measure of a person wasn't their success, but how they responded to failure or criticism." Inside, Catherine was preparing to present the Hayes Foundation's new 30-year strategic plan, focused on expanding their methodologies to emerging fields like artificial intelligence and climate innovation. "They're going to revolutionize AI assessment protocols," Emma noted with pride, "ensuring algorithms recognize merit regardless of demographic variables." "The work continues to evolve," Victoria observed, "far beyond fashion design class." "But the core principle remains the same," Emma replied, looking beyond appearances to recognize true potential. She turned to her former teacher with genuine affection. "We've come full circle in many ways. Now experts worldwide study how a fashion teacher and a farm girl in patched clothes changed educational assessment forever." As they rejoined the gathering, inside, Catherine had just unveiled the Foundation's newest initiative, a global virtual institute that would make Hayes-Peterson methodologies accessible to educational systems in developing regions worldwide. "By 2060, we aim to have implemented equitable assessment protocols in every UN member state," Catherine announced, "creating pathways for talent that might otherwise remain undiscovered and overlooked." The ambitious vision drew applause from the assembled guests. Victoria, watching from beside Emma, felt a profound sense of continuity, of work begun in one generation, expanded in another, and now poised to achieve truly global impact in the next. Later, as the evening drew to a close, young Victoria Hayes Barnes approached her namesake with a school project she had created. "Miss Peterson, look!" the 10-year-old exclaimed, unfolding a carefully constructed timeline. "I made this for history class. It shows everything that happened because you and Grandma changed education." Victoria examined the child's work with genuine interest. The timeline began with Ms. Peterson mocks Grandma's clothes and proceeded through 3 decades of educational transformation, culminating in UN Award for Global Impact. The simple progression, seen through a child's eyes, somehow captured the essence of their journey more powerfully than any official documentation. "This is excellent work," Victoria told the girl sincerely. "You've captured the key moments beautifully." "Teacher said I should add more about the challenges," young Victoria confided. "She said important changes always face resistance." "Your teacher is very wise," Victoria replied. "Change is rarely easy or straightforward." The child considered this thoughtfully. "Grandma says the best designs solve real problems, even when people don't realize they have them." "Your grandmother is also very wise," Victoria said with a smile. "And you seem to have inherited that wisdom." As the Hayes family finally gathered to depart, with promises of continued collaboration on new initiatives, Victoria found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a moment of cruelty and judgment in her classroom. 30 years earlier, what might have remained a painful memory, or at most a personal lesson, had instead catalyzed educational transformation on a global scale. Outside the restaurant, as they waited for their respective cars, Emma embraced her former teacher one last time. "The UN recognition is wonderful," Emma said, "but do you know what I find most meaningful about our work?" Victoria shook her head. "It's that somewhere today, a student with extraordinary potential was seen and recognized because appearance didn't obscure talent." Emma smiled. "That happens thousands of times every day now in classrooms using our methods worldwide. Most of those students will never know our names or our story, but their potential won't be overlooked because of what they wear or where they come from." As Victoria's car arrived and she prepared to depart, she took one final look at the Hayes family. 4 generations united by a commitment to seeing beyond appearances. From William's dramatic jet landing to Catherine's global initiatives to the twins already carrying forward their family's values, the legacy continued to evolve and expand. The simple message at the heart of their work, that true potential deserves recognition regardless of its packaging, had proven to be not just an educational principle, but a transformative philosophy with applications far beyond what any of them had initially imagined. And it had all begun with a teacher who mocked a farm girl's clothes, a grandfather who landed his private jet on a football field, and the remarkable journey of growth and learning that followed. As her car pulled away, Victoria's thoughts returned to the patched dress and worn boots now displayed at the Hayes Institute, humble artifacts that had launched a global movement. Perhaps the greatest designs, like the greatest lessons, did indeed solve problems people didn't realize they had. And perhaps the most meaningful transformations began not with grand visions, but with the simple courage to see differently and the willingness to grow beyond comfortable conventions. The New York skyline glittered behind her as she headed toward her hotel, a visual reminder of how far they had all come from that classroom confrontation 30 years ago. The journey had been neither direct nor easy, but its impact would continue to unfold in classrooms worldwide, creating pathways for talent that might otherwise have remained undiscovered and overlooked. All because a teacher had once mocked a farm girl's clothes, and both had found the courage to transform that moment into something greater than themselves. 50 years later, the old schoolhouse of Mountainview High had long since been replaced by a more modern facility, but on this special occasion, a commemorative ceremony was being held on the exact spot where the football field had once stretched, the place where William Hayes had landed his private jet half a century ago. What was once a simple high school football field now served as the central courtyard for the International Hayes Center for Educational Innovation, a sprawling campus dedicated to researching and implementing equitable assessment methodologies worldwide. The courtyard was filled with hundreds of attendees, educational leaders, former students, policymakers, and media representatives from around the world. They had gathered for the unveiling of a special installation marking the 50th anniversary of what had come to be known as the moment that changed education. At the center of the courtyard stood a life-sized bronze sculpture depicting 3 figures: a teenage girl in a patched dress and worn boots, holding a portfolio of designs, a distinguished older man in a business suit, his hand protectively on the girl's shoulder, and a fashion-conscious teacher depicted in the moment of realization, her expression capturing that pivotal transition from judgment to understanding. Seated in places of honor near the veiled sculpture were the remaining key figures from the original story. Emma Hayes Barnes, now in her 80s, sat with quiet dignity, her daughter Dr. Catherine Hayes Barnes beside her. Catherine's twins, William and Victoria, now adults in their early 40s, were there with their own children, representing the fourth generation of the Hayes legacy. Most poignantly, seated in a wheelchair, but still alert and engaged at 102, was Victoria Peterson herself, perhaps the most powerful testament to the story's impact. Few had expected her to reach this remarkable ceremony, but as she had told reporters, "I wouldn't miss this moment for anything in this world or the next." The current director of the Hayes Foundation, Dr. Victoria Hayes Barnes, named for the teacher whose transformation had been as central to the story as Emma's rejection, stepped up to the podium. At 44, she carried herself with the same quiet confidence that had characterized her grandmother, though she had her mother Catherine's scientific precision and analytical mind. 50 years ago on this very spot, she began, a private jet landed on a high school football field because a grandfather was outraged that his granddaughter had been judged by her clothes rather than her talent. What might have remained a simple confrontation instead became the catalyst for the most significant transformation in educational assessment methodology of the past century. The audience listened intently as Dr. Hayes Barnes outlined the extraordinary journey from that moment to the present, how a classroom incident had grown into a global movement that had fundamentally changed how human potential was recognized and nurtured. The Hayes-Peterson methodology is now implemented in every UN member state, she noted. Last year alone, over 50 million students worldwide were evaluated through blind assessment protocols that focus on their abilities rather than their appearances, backgrounds, or connections. She gestured to the educational leaders gathered from around the world. The data speaks for itself. Countries implementing these methods have seen dramatic increases in innovation, particularly from communities previously underrepresented in their fields. Talent that once might have been overlooked due to bias is now being recognized and developed. Victoria Peterson, listening from her place of honor, felt tears gathering in her eyes. Even now, 50 years later, she still remembered the shame she had felt when confronted with her biases and the profound growth that had followed her initial resistance. What had begun as her most humiliating professional moment had become the foundation for her most meaningful work and her greatest legacy. Today, Dr. Hayes Barnes continued, we unveil this sculpture not to celebrate individuals, but to commemorate a moment of transformation, when confrontation led not to conflict, but to collaboration, when judgment gave way to growth, and when a simple classroom incident sparked a global revolution in how we recognize human potential. At her signal, the veil was removed from the sculpture, revealing the 3 bronze figures caught in that moment of change. Applause rippled through the gathering as Emma Hayes Barnes was assisted to her feet by her granddaughter to inspect the sculpture more closely. Despite her advanced age, she moved with purpose, her eyes bright with emotion as she studied the bronze representation of her teenage self. Victoria Peterson was wheeled forward to join her, their eyes meeting with the deep understanding that can only come from sharing such an extraordinary journey. Despite the decades that had passed, both women could still recall with perfect clarity the tension of that confrontation and the remarkable transformation that had followed. "They got your expression just right," Emma said softly to Victoria, gesturing to the sculpture. "That moment when you began to see differently." Victoria nodded, her aged hand reaching out to touch the bronze representation of her younger self. "It was the most important moment of my life, though I didn't know it then." Following the unveiling, a special panel discussion featured educational leaders from 6 continents discussing the global impact of the Hayes-Peterson methodology. The moderator, a respected educational historian, turned to Victoria Peterson for the final question. "Ms. Peterson, you've lived to see your methodology transform education worldwide. Of all its applications and adaptations, which has meant the most to you personally?" Victoria considered the question carefully, her mind still sharp despite her advanced age. The Rural Literacy Initiative, she said finally, particularly in regions where girls were traditionally denied education based on appearance or social status. When I see young women being evaluated on their minds rather than their clothing or backgrounds, I feel we've truly come full circle from that day in my classroom 50 years ago. After the formal proceedings, a more intimate gathering was held in the Hayes Center's main hall, where artifacts from the 50-year journey were displayed alongside interactive exhibits demonstrating the methodology's applications across disciplines. Emma's original patched dress and boots, carefully preserved, held the place of honor, alongside first editions of Victoria's groundbreaking books and documentation of landmark implementations worldwide. As guests circulated through the exhibition, Victoria Peterson found herself approached by a young woman in her 20s who introduced herself as Marina Fernandez Taylor. "You may not remember me," the young woman said, "but you met me 30 years ago at the Hayes Institute. I was the Hayes scholar whose grandmother taught me sewing techniques." Victoria's eyes brightened with recognition. "Of course I remember. Your reinforcement methods for performance wear were revolutionary. How wonderful to see you again." Marina smiled. "I've spent my career implementing Hayes-Peterson protocols in technical education throughout Latin America. But I wanted to show you something special." She called over a shy teenage girl. "This is my daughter, Victoria Fernandez Taylor. She's just received early admission to the Hayes Center's International Design Program." The elderly Victoria reached out to shake the girl's hand, noticing immediately that she wore a beautifully constructed jacket with subtle reinforcement at the stress points, clearly made using the techniques her mother had learned from her grandmother. "Your jacket is extraordinary," Victoria commented. "Did you make it yourself?" The girl nodded. "Using my great-grandmother's methods, but with new sustainable materials I developed." "She was evaluated through blind assessment," Marina explained, proudly. "The admissions committee had no idea she was my daughter or that she came from our program in Mexico. They simply recognized the innovation in her work." Victoria felt a profound sense of completion wash over her. Here, in this moment, was the perfect embodiment of what they had worked for, talent being recognized purely on merit, across 4 generations and beyond any constraints of appearance, background or connection. As the celebration continued into the evening, the 4 generations of the Hayes family gathered with Victoria Peterson for a private moment away from the crowds. They stood together beside the bronze sculpture in the courtyard, now illuminated by subtle lighting as darkness fell. Emma, supported by her family, turned to Victoria. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day in your classroom? About presentation being everything?" Victoria nodded ruefully, all too clearly. "You were partly right," Emma said with gentle wisdom. "Presentation does matter, just not in the way you meant then. What we present to the world should be our best work, our truest ideas, our most innovative solutions, not our clothes or backgrounds, or connections." Victoria smiled. "The lesson of a lifetime, taught to me by a teenager in a patched dress." Little Victoria, Emma's great-granddaughter and the youngest generation present at just 8 years old, looked up at the bronze figures with curiosity. "Great-grandma, were you sad when the teacher was mean about your clothes?" Emma considered the question thoughtfully. "I was, sweetheart. But sometimes moments that hurt us can lead to changes that help many others. The important part isn't how stories begin, but how we choose to continue them." Catherine, ever the scientist, added, "And the data proved you right, Mom. Blind assessment protocols have identified talent that traditional methods overlooked for centuries." "The true innovation," said Dr. Victoria Hayes Barnes, "wasn't technological but philosophical. The radical notion that talent deserves recognition regardless of its packaging." As the family continued their reflections, a group of international Hayes scholars, young people from diverse backgrounds who had been identified through the blind assessment methodology, approached respectfully, asking to meet the pioneers who had made their opportunities possible. Victoria Peterson, despite her fatigue, insisted on speaking with each one. A young man from rural India whose architectural innovations were transforming sustainable housing. A woman from Nigeria whose textile engineering was revolutionizing medical applications. A teenager from Appalachia whose mathematical theories had upended conventional approaches to climate modeling. Each of these brilliant minds might once have been overlooked because they didn't fit conventional expectations of what brilliance should look like or where it should come from. Now they stood as living testimony to what could happen when potential was evaluated on merit alone. As the evening drew to a close, Victoria found herself alone with Emma for a final moment beside the sculpture that commemorated their shared journey. 50 years, Emma marveled softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. And sometimes, Victoria replied, it feels like several lifetimes ago. She studied the bronze figures thoughtfully. I wonder what your grandfather would think of all this. He only wanted to defend his granddaughter, not launch a global educational revolution. Emma smiled. Grandpa always thought big. I suspect he'd say this was exactly what he had in mind all along. Her eyes twinkled with mischief, though he might have suggested the sculpture should include his jet for dramatic effect. They shared a laugh. These two women whose confrontation, half a century earlier, had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of millions of students worldwide. You know, Victoria said reflectively, in all the years we've worked together, I don't think I ever properly apologized for how I treated you that first day. Emma shook her head. You've spent 50 years turning that moment into something meaningful and transformative. That's better than any apology. As they prepared to leave, Victoria looked once more at the bronze figures. The teenager in the patched dress, the protective grandfather, and the teacher caught in the moment of realization. The sculpture captured not just three individuals, but the precise moment when judgment gave way to understanding, when confrontation transformed into collaboration, and when a simple classroom incident began its evolution into a global movement. The full circle, Victoria murmured. What was that? Emma asked. We've come full circle, Victoria explained, from a moment when I judged you by your clothes to a world where millions of students are evaluated solely on their abilities and ideas. As they made their way back toward the Hayes Center, they passed groups of Hayes scholars from around the world, brilliant young minds identified through the methodology that bore their names. These students represented the legacy of that long ago confrontation. Talent recognized not for its packaging, but for its potential. The patched dress and worn boots that had once been mocked in a high school classroom had indeed launched a revolution. Not through force or conflict, but through the simple power of challenging assumptions about where brilliance comes from and what it looks like. And as night fell on the 50th anniversary celebration, the lights illuminating the bronze sculpture cast long shadows across what had once been a high school football field, shadows that stretched symbolically toward classrooms around the world where students were now being evaluated not by their appearances or backgrounds, but by the quality of their ideas and the depth of their potential. The teacher who had once mocked a farm girl's clothes and the student who had stood her ground with quiet dignity had transformed a moment of judgment into a legacy of opportunity that would continue to unfold long after both were gone, a fitting testament to the remarkable journey that began when a fashion teacher's cruel words were answered by a grandfather's private jet, and the courage of both women to grow beyond that moment towards something greater than either could have imagined alone. The full circle was complete, yet the ripples of their shared story continued to expand outward, touching lives and opening doors. in classrooms around the world, all because a teacher had learned to look beyond appearances and a student had helped transform rejection into revolution. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.